What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. It's our weekly show where we review the magic stories as they're posted on Wizard's website. And this week, we don't quite have a story review. You could also say we review Vorthos content specifically.
Right.
We have two pieces of Vorthos content to review this week. First, we have the Magic Story podcast that was released. It was released a couple weeks ago, but there's a reason. There's a reason why we're talking about it today, and we'll tell you about that in a little bit. But it's the Magic Story podcast with Doug Beyer called Introducing Martha Wells. And so in combination with that, we're also going to be talking about some of the things that we heard in the written article, Martha Wells Talks Magic Story Dominaria, by Jay Anelli, also better known as Vorthos J on Twitter. And this was through Gathering Magic. That's where the article was posted. So I would say it's not... I mean, usually we give the quick review at the beginning. I think we just want to have a discussion on it. So if you want to go and listen to those, or listen to the podcast and read the article, it's not a large time commitment. And if you're going to be going through the Dominaria stories with us, I think having the background on Martha Wells, the author of the Dominaria stories, I think it's important for you to do that. So for that reason, if only for that reason, I would say, please feel free and go watch/listen to that, and then come back here and hear our review and our discussion on it so that you can be a part of it and so that we're not influencing your opinions on it.
I disagree. I don't think that they're that important. If you want to watch this video instead, I think for once that is a suitable alternative.
Okay, and that's a big deal. If you're new here, that is not Amy's usual position on this subject. So, and that's a fair position to take as well. I don't think that by any means she is wrong on that. So, what I will say though is I feel like we're going to blend the two of them. If I can specify which of the two things I got a statement from, I will do that. But the main thing I wanted to talk about was the podcast. We had Doug Beyer, who is a member of Wizards of the Coast staff, Magic the Gathering staff, who was talking with Martha. Martha is the new person, if you are unaware, who is going to be taking the helm of writing the Dominaria weekly stories for us. And that's a big change.
Yeah.
It's a big change from what we've seen recently. Not saying whether that is good or bad yet. We will talk about that, our opinions on that. And you may have opinions as well. As with anything we talk about today, please
leave it in the comments.
Please, because that's the further continuation of the discussion. But we got to hear from Martha. Now, speaking of hearing from Martha, I want to talk about it just right at the top because it's pretty blatant to me. You know, we have been at fault for this in the past, not this specifically, but there were sound issues with this podcast. It's a podcast. It's only audio, right? And we've discussed our opinions on the Magic Story podcast versus incorporating some visual elements for that and things like that, but in this instance, it was solely audio-based. That's fine, but I don't know whether...
But then make the audio not suck.
I don't know whether the phone volume was too loud, like the speaker phone was too loud, whether it was too close to the microphone, a combination of the two.
It sounded like one of those really old, like, Nextel cell phones. Do you remember those?
Yes, I do.
It just sounded like someone was yelling at you over, like, a muffled loudspeaker.
Right, and I was going to say, I mean, when you're on a phone... and talking to somebody, especially for an interview, you want to make sure that you are heard. Right. So this in no way is to fault Martha, who was probably just trying to make sure that she could be heard for her first introduction to a fan base, basically. But I don't want to say a lot of the things, but some of the things that she was saying were so amplified that they got so garbled when being picked up by the audio. It was...
I don't even know if that's it. I think it was loud and garbled. I don't think it was garbled because it was loud.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Because I don't feel it was loud enough to cause that much of a distortion.
Okay.
It just seemed distorted and loud and bad.
And I will say, I mean, Amy's done more work with this type of stuff than I have, but I'm not an audio engineer. I just know that
Neither am I.
No, I'm just saying you've had some more experience with audio recording and microphone work and stuff than I have, but I still have some knowledge based on producing these videos every week and all these different videos every week that we do. So, you know, that's just a critique. It's not, you know, there are ways to have fixed that, and it was a little upsetting to me that it wasn't remedied for Martha's first introduction to all of us. Obviously,
yeah, I think it should have been in person, and I understand if that's not a doable thing at the time, but that's not a great way to introduce this new person to the Magic community who you're hoping that they'll hold in high regard, but you're really not sure if they will, and you know, it's a very large shift from what they're used to, so maybe you should do it in a bit more of a bit more of an intimate and charming way.
And
I'll use those words.
I will say, right, there was some discussion in both the article and the podcast discussing Martha's method for writing these particular stories in terms of getting notes on them and revisions and etc. And what she said was she writes kind of some drafts, sends them in, and then receives notes on them, whether that be written notes, you know, like through a Google Doc or something like that, or like audio notes, like she discusses it with someone on the phone. Either way, it's clear that she is not showing up to the office and saying, hey, what are your notes on that thing that I sent you?
Right.
That's fine. She is, I mean, this is 2018. You're allowed to live in different parts of the country, hell, different parts of the world, and communicate electronically to get this kind of a thing done. But again, yes.
But nowadays, there are technologies that will ensure that those interactions go fairly smoothly.
Right.
And this didn't seem to be.
Right. And I only mention it at the top because it was a through line throughout the entire interview, because obviously it was. They didn't change the audio halfway through. But to get into the meat and potatoes of what was discussed,
yes,
besides the revisions, which I just brought up,
because we can complain about stuff all day, but it's not going to get us anywhere.
No, and we'll get there. But I do want to say at the top, now that we've said all that, I do want to say that I am very excited from hearing from Martha again, verbally and through text. I'm excited because of her resume, because of her accolades, because of her accomplishments. She's the real deal. She's won multiple awards. She has written multiple novels. And she has, not only has she written multiple novels, not only has she won multiple awards, but, because those were original pieces of material, which is amazing, and it right up front means that she is capable. She is capable of holding her own, of writing well, of doing character work and things like that in terms of writing. But more importantly, I think another point that she brought up in the podcast, which was very awesome to hear, is that she has done work on IP, intellectual property, such as Stargate and Star Wars. Now, I am not a Stargate guy.
I am. I'm not a guy.
I was going to say Amy's a Stargate guy. No, but I enjoy Star Wars very much, and because of that, I am very aware of not only the ravenous fan base that can be built up around something as iconic as Star Wars, but also the amount of back material that exists for Star Wars, and that's the cinematic universe as well as the extended universe through books and video games and television series and things like that.
Wars.
Yes, exactly. Right. Whatever it is, There are so many different things that go into that, that was Martha's way of alluding to, I have worked with fan bases and their IP before, and she said that she has come out of doing that, specifically Stargate and Star Wars were the things that she mentioned, and she said because of that, she did not think that it would be as difficult as that to cover Dominaria. I don't disagree with that because, as I said, I'm aware of the backlog of Star Wars material, and I'm sure I'm not as aware of all of it either, but because there is a lot. But
I personally just think that the audience is smaller.
For what? For Dominaria?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
The Vorthos community is significantly smaller than Star Wars fans.
Well, but again, don't forget, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but don't forget, Vorthos are a subset of Magic the Gathering fans / players, and the kinds of people, yes, go ahead, have the hashtag Vorthos Pride. Yes, exactly. But you also have to realize that Star Wars fans are not all fans that would read Star Wars novels.
Yeah.
Right? That is also a subset. I still don't disagree that the Star Wars novel reading fan base is likely larger than the Vorthos fan base, although I have no statistics on that.
Right.
That is just my assumption in terms of how long Star Wars has been around versus how long the Vorthos community and Magic stories have been around.
There's just more of a reach.
Yes. Yeah, as well, yeah, and because, you know, not everybody plays Magic, but everybody at least knows, I think, of the existence of Star Wars, which then could lead them to novels, etc. Anyway, so I liked that she mentioned her knowledge of working with intellectual property that has a large fan base going in, and having to write for things that she did not herself create at the start. That's a good sign. I also appreciated the little story that she told during the podcast of the Jack the Ripper story panel that she was a part of. I don't remember exactly where there was a convention or something like that. I apologize for not getting that exactly correct. But she said that she was a speaker on a panel of speakers discussing Jack the Ripper. Now, she had written a book, or at least had studied the material.
Well, didn't she say she wasn't originally on the panel and they brought her in because somebody else had to back out or something?
It's possible.
Am I just making that up?
It's possible. Again, you can go and check it for yourselves. We don't want to purposefully pass on false information. We don't want to purposefully pass on false information. So if we're incorrect, we apologize. That's just, these are our memories of it. But I only had so much that I wrote in my notes here,
and it was a couple of weeks ago now.
Yes.
So.
But we had that information, and she discussed the fact that the other speakers were not doing as good of a job in the eyes of the audience in discussing Jack the Ripper. She said that the crowd that showed up was larger than they expected for the panel, because there were a lot of people who were interested in the Jack the Ripper story. And again, obviously by story I mean historical accounts, etc., of the case, of the investigation, etc. And she, as an author, had done her research for a project that was related to Jack the Ripper, and she mentioned that she was able to kind of spearhead the discussion once she realized that the other speakers were not as knowledgeable, and was able to kind of point to the fans to take over and start talking about this stuff to help her out, because they were more able to do that. The fans
were very knowledgeable on the subject, whereas the panelists weren't as knowledgeable on the subject.
And it allowed the fans to get more enjoyment out of it, because they were able to show off their fandom, as well as hearing from other fans and someone like herself who had done that research. So once again...
And fans like to be involved in whatever it is that they're a fan of.
Right.
You know, hence this show even.
Well, I was just going to say, and speaking of the show, you guys are all intelligent enough people so that I don't then have to explain to you how that parallels, that Jack the Ripper story parallels to why she is a good person to have to write for the Dominaria stories. Because we are that fan base, right? We are that fan base showing up en masse and saying, we're here, give us something. Right. And she's not, because of that, the hope, obviously, and what she was discussing is that she is trying to come as prepared. Speaking of being prepared, some of the ways that she was able to get prepared were through her own discussion. She was able to see the art of the characters, the art of the locations, whether that is past art, current art, because she was able to look at the world guide for this run of Dominaria stories and this set of Dominaria. That's great. That's very important. That is what the creative team works off of normally anyway. So that makes perfect sense. And she mentioned things that she enjoyed. She enjoyed writing about Teferi and JaAR, existing characters, names we've heard before. But she also mentioned enjoying writing for Tiana and Arbad, an angel and a vampire respectively, who are original characters for this run in Dominaria. That's amazing. I appreciate that because it's new characters, it's things that she gets to write about. Now, to skip to the article, Vorthos J's article that he wrote for Gathering Magic, she said that she got to develop some of the new characters' backstories, she got to develop some of the plot elements, and she got to develop some of the details for the fight scenes. That gives me two pieces of information. It gives me information on stuff that she did, and then stuff that she likely didn't do, or didn't get a chance to do. And so, this is where, I don't know if you have anything on that, because I want to move into...
No.
She also mentioned, and I appreciated this just to continue to pile accolades on her, because this is very important to us, she mentioned that she liked the Hour of Devastation stories. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal coming from this side of the camera. Right. Because we really liked the Hour of Devastation stories. Heck, go back and watch our top 10 list from 2017. You'll notice a theme. But I'm glad that she mentioned that that's what she appreciated, that she got to go back and read those and that she liked those. Because I'm a guy who enjoys character-driven stories, yes. And that's what Hour of Devastation was.
Right.
It gave you the characters, it made you care about them, even if it was one story at a time.
Right, but it was also this gigantic, meaningful allegory of a story. It wasn't just character development.
Yes. And so that was fantastic to hear. I liked that a lot. What I was a little nervous about, and to a degree it makes perfect sense, and I'm not faulting anyone for this, it's just something that I noticed I'm going to point it out. If she said that she got to develop some of the new characters' backstories, plot elements, and details for fight scenes, when you look at that broad picture, that's not a lot. I mean, obviously she can't develop Teferi's backstory. It already exists. Same with JaAR, Karn, Jaya Ballard, every member of the Gatewatch that is there. I get that. Excuse me. But it seems very constraining. Now, she did not seem to mind, but of course, in doing an interview with Wizards of the Coast, she's not going to say, well, I didn't really like that you tied my hand there. Of course she's not. And I'm not saying that she feels that way at all. I'm just saying that if I were that author, that would at least be something that was in my mind. Because that
might not have been Wizards tying her hands. You know, that might have been her own decision.
Also true.
Saying,
very true.
Oh, you know, there's lots of novels, it's too much material. Give me the synopsis and I'll work off of that.
Yes. Now, I think Martha did a really good job. She made a point in the text article of saying that the creative team, I'm reading this off my notes because I want to get this correct. The creative team really cares, and that they worked very hard making this set of stories and this set in general fun and enjoyable and true to the characters and world. I like that sentiment. I like that she made a point of saying that.
Yes.
Because, not that I doubted it for a second at all, but it's her praising the people that she worked with. She didn't have to say that, right? If she had a bad experience working with the creative team, she wouldn't have said something like that. To be fair, she probably would have tried to stay out of the spotlight as much as possible if she had a bad experience, but it's, and obviously I'm not alluding to it, I'm just saying that I appreciated...
We don't know what her experience was.
No,
let's be real.
Of course not. But I appreciated that she took the time to say that and to compliment the creative team, because they had a lot on their plate for Ixalan, and there were not a lot of them for Ixalan.
No.
And so, and Doug, to a degree, mentioned that in the podcast in saying that, you know, it wasn't really sustainable what they did for Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan. And through following those creative team members on Twitter, I was able to read, and I'm sure many of you were as well, Kelly Diggs's tweets, for example, where he even said, in his own words, that he was used kind of as a sounding board almost for Allison Lures. I encourage you to go read those tweets. I'm not trying to, as always, I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth. Go check out Kelly Diggs's Twitter from a couple weeks ago, where he was discussing his work on the creative team and basically pointed to Allison for a lot of it and said that it was mostly her and that he was just there to collaborate with and kind of bounce ideas off of. I also personally, Amy and I, because we just talked about this, wanted to also compliment the editor, Greg.
Yes.
Because, and I believe I said this on Twitter as well, but the editor is very important. And the reason is because in the past, we've discussed on this show, sometimes the editing is not good and or we don't even notice it existing.
Right.
And that's a problem because...
We'll read the story and we'll be like, okay, how many mistakes did we find?
Grammatical errors that make it hard to follow, spelling errors that are so blatant that it's almost comical. And so if it's a serious portion of the story, it really just takes you out of that moment because you're like, wow, they spelled it that way and nobody noticed? Oh my God, you know?
I mean, personally, I'm a terrible speller, but, you know, I don't expect to immerse people in my written word and not edit it first.
And so that's why we want to throw out a compliment and say that the editing in Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan was so much better, and it's not the kind of thing that you really notice like story to story when you're reading it, because you're not sitting there at the end and going, wow, that was very well edited, I didn't notice any mistakes, because you're so focused on the story. But
that's the point.
But because we didn't end those stories by going, wow, there were so many mistakes there, it means that it was well done. The editing was well done. Yes, exactly. So, but I still understand that one editor, one full-time writer, and then one person to collaborate with for that writer to bounce ideas off of, despite the fact that there were others who wrote the story guide or the world guide and the art book, despite all of that, I agree that that's not sustainable. I mean, we ourselves discussed that month of Allison where we had 3 or 4 stories in a row with her. Yeah. She did all those Magic Story podcasts with Blake Rasmussen for the Commander Anthology, I believe it was. So there was a lot of work being done by Allison, and to be fair... And
her writing is great.
I was going to say, to be fair, it never faltered. It was never like, wow, you can really tell she's been writing this 4 weeks in a row.
Right.
But
as you said a second ago, it's obviously not a sustainable system to just do that forever.
Right, and I wouldn't have blamed her if it did start to falter because she was writing all of this stuff over and over again. And so Because, there's only so much creativity. I mean, writer's block is a thing, but if you have that kind of a deadline and you are somewhat alone, you obviously have other people to bounce ideas off of, but if you're somewhat alone and you're getting trapped up, you may not be able to do it fully. And again, that's understandable, and I wouldn't blame her. So for them to bring in someone like Martha is very helpful, and it allows the creative team to move on, or the narrative team to move on and work on other things as well, and just go in and give revisions and notes and rewrites to the author whom they have hired to write these stories for them.
Well, as I was going to say,
Sorry.
It's not just writer's block as a problem. There's also the problem of just simply being overworked. And also the problem of becoming disillusioned with what your job now is.
Yes.
Especially if that's not what you were hired by the company originally to do, which is, in her case, the case.
Yes. So moving on to one more light topic, and then two more somewhat heavier discussions. First, I really liked that both in the podcast and in the article itself, there was discussion of the color pie and the different kinds of mana-using characters that we have. And Doug asked her who she likes to write for the most, or who she's enjoyed writing for the most so far, and she mentioned blue characters. And of course, off the top of my head, I know that she's got characters like Jace and Teferi as mono blue, but she's also got Joyra, blue-red, to talk about. That's great. So in enjoying those characters, hopefully we get some good stuff. And again, That's not me doubting it. I'm just stating a fact. I hope that we get some cool Teferi and Joyra and Jace stories. And don't forget what we mentioned earlier. She mentioned that she liked writing Teferi and Joyra. So she enjoyed that.
She also said that she considers herself, although to be red and blue, she considers herself to be more red
Mostly,
than
yes.
blue.
And that was...
As someone who considers themselves to be red and green, I would like to see where she can take the story then.
And in case...
I'm hoping that means she'll do a good job.
Yes.
At least with the red characters.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
Which, again, off the top of my head, Chandra, Jaya, Joyra. Again, there will likely be more introduced, etc., old and new, but those are the ones that we know about already.
With similar names, why not? Because those are all similar.
So that's just something that we will have to wait and see on. But yes, that portion of her saying what she kind of considers her alignment to be, that was from the text article itself. So I appreciated that Vorthos J asked that question of her.
Yes, it was very cool.
Yes, exactly. And again, it is a way of, sure, we'll do it now. It's a way of showing off her...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. So, and again, that's a big deal, right? That's very important and a cool way to kind of show off to your new fan base.
Yeah,
I like that.
Relate to the fans.
Yes, thank you. Now we'll get on to two other things that I wanted to discuss. First of all, and I genuinely want to know if all of you felt the same way that I did / we did. I listened to the podcast. We listened to the podcast. We read the article. And we heard about all of the information that Martha was given. Martha was given the world guide to work off of. She was given the art, the characters. Now, from the article, the Gathering Magic article, she said that she read the world guide and other materials, and that she was briefed by some of the creative team on the characters, the history of Dominaria, and the outline. Again, as Amy mentioned earlier, we do not know what her experience was like outside of these two interviews, audio and text. We have no further information besides that, except her amazing resume, which again is not something to gloss over. Very important. Something that concerned me, though, in this article and this podcast, she is a novelist. She writes novels. That's awesome. That's not the part that concerns me. Sorry, I know I said concerns and then mentioned that. That's not what I mean. What I'm concerned about is she is a novelist, and in coming up on Dominaria, a set that has the majority of its prior story told through novels, not once in the podcast nor the written article did she mention ever reading one of those novels.
Right.
Let alone all of them. It wasn't mentioned that she read one of them. Now again, I have no inside information, so it's totally possible that she read every single one and it just wasn't mentioned.
Right.
But I seriously doubt it. And that's fine. That is a lot of material. If you look at Vorthos's online, who have been discussing this, the novels are hard to come by. Some of them. Some are very easy. A lot of the older ones, very difficult. And depending on your opinions of those novels, they may not be things that you would have wanted her to read because you may not have enjoyed how some of the characters were depicted or the writing style or whatever, because the novels were written so long before the characters were fleshed out in card form that it was very disjointed in terms of when the novels came out versus when the cards came out and kind of how those characters were aligned. This time they are doing it a lot differently because we know how far ahead the creative team works and the narrative team works and R&D works. So they have the way of making the authors, the outside authors, aware of those things. But for a set like Dominaria that you are returning to, it was just very obvious to me, to us, that the novels weren't mentioned at all. Yeah. At all. And even if she read some of them but not all of them, I can understand that. That's a lot of material to have to get through. And she has her own life as well. And I'm sure Wizards would not have paid her to take time out to read all of those novels. Because that's a lot. And that's not a crack at Wizards. That's a lot of time. Yes, it's a lot of time and a lot of money. And it's not financially viable for them to do that. But for someone who is so willing to go so in depth, to come into a fandom and a plane specifically that has such a rich, full backlog of information, that's a lot. And I can only put myself in her shoes. And as someone who would come into that world, I would really want to be as knowledgeable as possible on that material if I were to write it for scores of fans who are going to be reading it. Because she is good. There is no question that Martha is good. But if she does not have all of the information going in, all of her writing ability is not going to help if the fans who are going in expecting certain things aren't getting that. Now that in and of itself, the fan expectations, we are talking about that next week, not here. But I just wanted to point out the fact that it was very obvious to me. It kind of became the elephant in the room throughout both of these.
Yeah.
That I was like, but did she read the novels at all? Because in the podcast, the thing that I wrote down was she said she enjoys the art of the characters and of the locations. She read the world guide and she saw the art for this set. No mention of the novels. Then in the text, she said, and I'll say it again, because it's important. She read the World Guide and other materials. That's a quote. I don't know what other materials is. And she was briefed by some of the creative team. The word some is also a quote. On the characters, the history of Dominaria, and the outline. That is very specific language. Those words are very specific that they used, and that's why I wrote them down. Because, again, I don't like to misqualify things. It's not appropriate for me to do that, and it's not fair. But those are the words that I read. And so I'm giving to all of you my opinion, our opinions on what those words indicated to us by reading between the lines. Again, I am excited for Dominaria. Do not get me wrong. I am looking forward to seeing what Martha herself, as well as through R&D's input, can do with these characters in this world. I'm looking forward to it. And I hope you guys are too. And I don't want to... Okay.
Definitely.
I know I keep saying I
was like, do you not realize I'm excited for it?
No. Amy clearly hates it. She's not looking forward to it at all.
I bet.
Yes. We are both very excited. It was just a little troubling that that topic was not touched on. And again, from my perspective, seemingly purposefully not touched on.
Yeah. That was kind of the worrisome part.
Right. And, again...
They were very, very specific at pinpointing certain things that she was using as inspirational materials for her writing. And the novels were never once mentioned.
And I am, as I said, and I'll say it again once again because it bears repeating, I am willing to be wrong. I am not saying that she didn't read them, and that's not what I'm saying. If she didn't read them, that's troubling to me. If she did, then I apologize, but this is just how I read the article and heard the podcast.
Right.
Because to me, that's really how it seemed. And I encourage all of you, if you didn't listen and read, please do that, and then tell me if you agree or disagree and why, because I would love to be proved wrong. I really would. It's not something that I'm happy about noticing, because it's troublesome. That subject aside, unless you have anything left on that, one last thing to cover, and again, not something that I'm happy about either, but something that I wanted to mention that, again, we've discussed it, that we wanted to mention. This Magic Story podcast and this article, as we mentioned, are from a few weeks ago. And as I mentioned towards the top of this video, there's a reason why we're making this video now and not 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Because 2 weeks ago was the finale of the Rivals of Ixalan story.
Right.
Now, this week, at least as far as I saw, it's possible that I missed it, but I doubt it, Wizards of the Coast did not produce any Vorthos content this week on Wednesday. Again, possible that I missed it, although I doubt it. Because,
if you found some, leave it in the comments.
As with anything else, please prove me wrong on things. I love that. I love being proved wrong because it helps me to learn and to grow and to understand. And if I have to come here next week and say, hey, I was wrong about this one thing or these two things, here's how and why, I'll do that. I'm more than happy to do that, and I've done it in the past because I'm not that guy. I'm not going to come on here and say, this is what it is, and I don't care. If I'm wrong, please prove me wrong. I appreciate it. But I did not see any Vorthos content today. Obviously, there was Vorthos content last week. It was the alternate endings to the Rivals stories, and the week before was the finale of the Rivals stories. But it was also this podcast, and then, of course, not produced by Wizards of the Coast, but this article. Now, I say not produced by Wizards of the Coast, and I specify produced because if this was the first introduction to Martha as our new writer for the Dominaria stories. Clearly, Vorthos J and Gathering Magic would not have had her contact information if not for Wizards. Right. Again, I don't know that. But these are the assumptions that I'm drawing.
Safe to assume.
Yes. Again, prove me wrong, please. But these are the assumptions that I'm drawing from the fact that they were both released on the same day, and that, you know, it just seems to be, since that was the introduction for her, that both of these were released on the same day for a reason. Now, because of that, that also is what leads me to, even though I personally consider Jay to be a leader in the Vorthos community, I think that it's interesting because with doing an interview kind of, I don't know the right word, but sanctioned, that's the right word, sanctioned by Wizards for her, for Martha, the new author, I can understand why the word novels relating to Dominaria didn't come up, but I have to imagine that if he was given the opportunity to ask about it, he would have. Again, assumptions, I could be wrong, and I'd love to be wrong. But I have to imagine, because that would have been one of my first questions, was, what did you think of the novels? What were your favorite novels? What did you enjoy? And not to try to catch her in something, because that's not fair to her. If she didn't have the time, that's not her fault. And so I'm not trying to throw her under the bus. Once again, I'm looking forward to her stories, and I love her resume. But it's something that I noticed as a fan and as a consumer of the content. I would like to know these things about Dominaria, because as I said, the novels are very hard to come by. And we will talk more about our knowledge of Dominaria next week, because I want you to know where we're coming from going into that. That's really important to us as well. But because these articles, again, podcast or article, came out on that day, I mean, we talked about the word troublesome. That was troublesome. Why undercut the end of your block, the final story for your entire block, by saying, here's the final story, and now that the final story's over, here's information about Dominaria, which we know you're all super excited about. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yes, we are super excited about it, but you know what else we're super excited for? The finale that we've been waiting, 12 stories to hear? We read all of the Ixalan stories, we read all of the Rivals of Ixalan stories, and now the finale comes out, and you completely undercut your own team's story writing by releasing the Magic Story podcast and allowing Gathering Magic to release an interview with the new author, both in the same day.
Yeah.
And it's not like you needed to do that. Because, as I mentioned, last week was a toss-in of, here are the alternate endings to Rivals of Ixalan, which, if you watched last week's video or read Hipsters of the Coast's article today, which I agree with, was some of the parallel points were kind of interesting, but Hipsters of the Coast's article that they released today, Wednesday, we both, us and they, spoke about why those alternate endings were odd. If not flat out bad, they were odd. So why not release it last week? Or, as I mentioned, if there was no Wizards-specific Vorthos content this week, why not release it this week? Why did we need to know about Martha that early? Because unless... The only thing that I brought up to Amy that I could possibly think of was, unless Wizards wanted to give their fans the opportunity to read up on her own personal novels in the lead up to it, so that you wanted to give them enough time, that's the only thing I can...
That would work.
No, I agree with you. I'm just trying to play devil's advocate. Yeah, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate and find the reason why that was the case. Because it's just, otherwise it just made no sense to me.
Well, if you're going to play devil's advocate, I will play the other part.
Sure,
and I
please.
will say, that perhaps they weren't altogether that proud of the end of the stories that they had. And so they figured they'd release it all the same day and you wouldn't notice or care.
Yeah. It's upsetting. Because, and it was there was a calculated reason for us to review these this week and not last week or the week before. There was a reason for it. And it's because we didn't want to do what Wizards did.
Right.
By talking about the Rivals of Ixalan story and then saying, okay, but let's talk about Dominaria.
Right.
No. Because it's
not really fair to Ixalan.
And to Ixalan as a block, to Rivals of Ixalan as a set, and to the R&D narrative team who, again, worked, in my estimation, against very tough odds to put together damn good stories.
Right.
In the face of having a lot of their co-workers kind of,
gone.
I mean, yes. Right.
Gone.
For one reason or another, those people are not there anymore. And that's fine for those people that moved on to doing bigger and better things. Congrats to them, and we wish them the best. We will miss them.
Yes.
And I assume that the R&D narrative team also missed them. But I want to take this moment, if you're still watching, thank you for sitting through this and for letting us get this out. I want to applaud the R&D narrative team for the work that they did. And I want to, I guess, from my perspective, apologize to them for the fact that their ending, their finale, was undercut that way.
Yeah.
Because that's a damn shame. And sure.
And it's not really fair.
No. And
for their own company to do to them.
And you can say, and you would be absolutely right, you can say, Joe, we can read a story and listen to a podcast and read an article all in the same day. And you're right, you could. And or over the course of a week. And you could do that. But I'm not talking about the Joe Blow who is just reading the stories to enjoy the stories, don't get me wrong, but people who are then going to consume either reactive content like ours or joining in on the discussion in Reddit or on Reddit, on Twitter, on Facebook, on all of these other, all the social media platforms with all the other Vorthoses out there. What was more talked about? Was it more information on Dominaria? Or was it the end of the Rivals of Ixalan story? Maybe it was balanced for you. Maybe you didn't notice it. And that's great. I hope that that's the case because to me it was very upsetting.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, we made the conscious decision to let's hold off on reviewing this particular Magic Story podcast until there's time because they also said, hey, guess what? The Dominaria stories are coming a heck of a lot sooner than you thought they were, in 4 weeks, but here's all of this information, right? And we found out about the demons and the Cabal and all this other stuff. There was a lot of information to unpack that week about Dominaria, and then now you also have the finale of the story that a couple of someones worked really hard on.
Yeah.
And a lot of us spent the time to listen and watch and etc. And again, review and react and discuss.
Yeah.
And then it just felt a little bit lackluster to have your finale coupled with, don't forget, here's the next big thing that everybody's actually really excited about.
Right.
It was
a slap in the face.
It felt a little insulting. Maybe you disagree. And as always, with anything that we talked about today, I desperately want to know your opinions. Again, sorry. We desperately want to know your opinions. I know you've been kind of joining along with me. Amy and I had this discussion beforehand, and we agreed on a lot of these points. This was not the week of, I have to disagree with you, and this is why.
Yeah.
There were some, because there always are, but because again, Amy may be red-green, but I'm white-blue. So we definitely clash on a lot of things. But when we come together and agree on something, that's usually the indicator to me that it somewhat holds merit. And that's why we pass it along to you as well. Please let us know what you thought. Did you agree? Did you disagree? What did you think of the review in general? Do you think that we were too harsh? Do you think that we...
Yeah, I think this time in particular, we really want to hear from you guys, because I think we need our opinions validated a little bit from you guys.
Yes.
As well as we would really like to be proven wrong about many of these things. If people have insights that maybe we've missed, I think we're really holding out hope for that.
Yes, and although I thought we were going to end on a sour note, and I don't like doing that, but I feel like we've been doing a lot more recently, I want to end on a positive. Again, I'll say it for like the 16th time in this video. I'm excited for what Martha is going to do. Very excited. I'm excited for what she's going to bring. And I want to mention it because we want her to feel welcomed into the community as well. Excuse me, I've been talking a lot.
That's important.
Yes.
I can't sit here and say I'm excited for what she's going to bring. I don't have an opinion yet.
Okay.
But in terms of wanting her to feel welcome in the community, at least as long as she's here, that's important for everyone to understand that she's going to need that.
And so if you are one of those people who did not go read the article, at least go read the article. I will say that from that article, I wanted to point out that Martha has a website. And if you want to know about her past exploits, her awards, her books, her novels, etc., I encourage you to, obviously you could read the article and listen to the podcast, but you can go to her website. And it's marthawells.com. If for whatever reason you are not aware of the proper spelling, marthawells.com, for her information and for her things that she presents, including something that Amy thought was really cool. Not that I didn't, but that Amy especially thought was really cool.
I can't remember what it is.
On her website, she releases things.
Oh, yes. Okay. So when she writes novels, she will actually release is it the first chapter, or is it just a full chapter?
It's the way that it's written is excerpts from the first chapters of her stories.
So it's just portions of the first chapter of her novels. But she releases those for free on her website, which I think is exceptional and something I haven't heard of really.
Fair.
I think that's a great way to generate fans, because you're giving them the opportunity to see if they like your work, really see if they like your work without spending money. And then if they do, they'll spend the money.
Right.
I think a lot of times when it comes to novelists, what people do is they just hear from, their friends or whatever. It's just word of mouth. Oh, this particular novelist is good. And then they'll actually go out and spend the money on the novel. I think the Vorthos community can benefit from it because we can go on her website and sort of see, oh, okay, these are some of the other things she's written. And maybe I want to buy some of her books because I like the Vorthos content that she creates. And so maybe I'll like her novels, her other novels as well. And then we get a sneak peek of it from her website. And then, people who are not in the Vorthos community but are fans of hers might just start reading the Wizards stories now because they're like, oh, she's working on a new project, and then, they might turn out to be customers of Wizards now,
right? Like her social media followers, right? Her followers on Twitter, etc., who follow her because they like her books, now will know about Magic as well and might go check it out. Now, going off of what Amy was just saying, I encourage you. I would say if you care about my opinion at all, which it seems like you do, you just sat through this whole video, Amy definitely doesn't.
Nope.
But if you care about my opinion at all, what I would say is I don't recommend that you be disingenuous about it, but if you want, it's actually very beneficial for you for us as a community to do things like go to her website, check out her stories. If you're interested, buy some of her novels, because this is a new venture for Wizards. If this is something that you like, and she as an author becomes more successful, gains more Twitter followers, gets more people to purchase her book, gains more fans, more authors in the future will be more willing to come in and do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because
they'll realize it's actually beneficial for them.
Right. Instead of just, oh my God, we're coming into this with, such an existing fan base already. No.
Right. We'll make a paycheck, but that's about it.
Right. Instead, it's something that they're looking forward to doing in hopes of gaining new fans, right, but also in the hopes of joining a good community and trying to tell good stories and stuff. And that's ultimately, in my mind, ideally, that's what an author would want to do at all times. And so...
And again, kind of commingle those fans, among lots of different mediums and companies and things like that.
Yeah. And so, like I said, don't do it because you're like, well, it'll get us good authors in the future, I'm going to go on her website. Go on her website if you're interested. Check out those first chapters or those excerpts from those first chapters and see if you like her, even if you just want to check out her writing style to kind of give yourself a sneak peek of what is to come in Dominaria in terms of how it's going to be written. I encourage you to do that.
Or to give yourself sort of a basis. I mean, because then maybe when you read the Dominaria stories, you sit there and go, oh, this is different than I expected. Right. It's not like her other writing, Yeah.
Or you can get a taste of her voice.
Right.
As an author. Either way, and I think both have its merits.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop.
Yeah, this is too much.
This whole long video. I genuinely want to thank you guys so much for watching, for sticking it out for this long. As I said, please stay tuned for next week when we will be back talking about our knowledge of Dominaria as well as how we are going into reading those stories. I think it's really important if you're going to be following along with us, which we hope you do. We hope you're enjoying yourselves. And share this with your friends. That helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
Especially if you noticed, you're welcome. There's no ads on our videos anymore because we're not big enough. Thanks, YouTube. But regardless, we're not bitter about it.
Lack of monetization.
That's life, right? It happens. This is not our full-time job by any means.
Right.
Otherwise, we'd be doing a heck of a lot more.
If it were, we would be very poor. Very poor.
This studio would look quite different. Anyway, so...
studio?
Exactly. But I want to thank you guys so much for watching once again. Like I said, it helps us out a lot. We want to hear your opinions, your discussions. I'm going to say it this time because I've kicked it over to Amy twice. Show off your hashtag Vorthos Pride in the comments down below, on our Twitter, on our Facebook. Those links are down in the description box below. This has been another episode of JaAR on Geek for All. I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.